My phone
That's right.
was there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live, Is Your AI Worth Its Salary? I am Karly Rowe, the president of our Inovalon provider business, and I am joined by Todd Crosslin, global industry principal, healthcare and life sciences at Snowflake. So let's talk a little bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Todd.
You said hi. So.
Hi. We are so excited to get to spend some time talking about AI. And AI is no longer just a buzzword. It's here and it is all around us and changing the way we operate at home and at work. I would love to ask the audience, and I'm just going to ask Todd to start, but Todd, have you been in a car accident or had your car hit recently?
Thankfully, I have not. Although with 4 daughters, there have been some unfortunately some instances. No one has been seriously injured, but I am familiar with the concept of some fender benders in the prior several years.
Well, glad to hear that nobody has gotten hurt. And I live in Phoenix, and over the last 3 years, I have gotten hit about 5 different times. Now, before you start questioning my driving abilities, I will assure you that many of those times it was not my fault or cars passing by. But the bigger point about it is Phoenix has a very large transient population. And our metro area has seen an increase in the number of car accidents, wrong way drivers, and just in general overall safety on the roads. And so Phoenix more recently turned to technology. We turned to AI, autonomous driving cars. We are testing in the Phoenix metro area about 13 different companies for self-driving cars. And Waymo One has made an entrance about late 2023, early 2024. And today, I think there are somewhere around 150,000 rides a week in the Phoenix metro area alone. And the data is showing exactly what you would think. Less accidents that are serious, where airbags have to deploy, and less injury-related collisions. So, that is a huge, huge benefit. And it's not just changing, making the roads safer, but it's really changing the mindset in the Phoenix area. 10 years ago, if you had asked me, hey, Karly, would you ever imagine yourself getting into a driverless car and going down the highway at 60, 70 miles per hour? I probably would have thought you were a little crazy, Todd. But it's this type of innovation that really inspires me. Also, my kids love counting how many Waymos there are, but legitimately, you can't go a mile or 2 miles without seeing several of these Waymos or self-driving cars on the road. And that's the exciting part. This type of innovation and thinking about what that can bring into our lives and into our workplace to tackle a problem that perhaps if I had said to you, Todd, how can you make the road safer in Arizona? Well, they've tried cameras, they've tried extra police force, and none of it was working. Yeah. So how does this translate into healthcare? How do we think about what's next? And how do we measure that success so that, we're not just deploying technology for the sake of deploying technology?
Yeah, and a little equivalence here. One of the amazing things, so I drive a Tesla, and it's really interesting. I'm a little bit outside the city, and so outside Fort Worth, Texas, and one of the amazing things that is when you're in it like we are as technologists, right, and kind of behind the scenes a little bit, I can literally tell whenever my car has been on a road and how much training data there is on a smaller road the farther out you go from the city, right? And you think about it over time, the more and more training data there is, the better and better that the technology gets. And so you think about, that's why obviously Waymo is in, right, areas like Phoenix. That's why Tesla's now started in Austin, is that that area is, there's so much volume of traffic and the amount of training data is immense. And I think, to your point about like translating that to healthcare, the fun part is going to be the data, the training data. How do we get and translate, driving data, and environmental data, and how do we bring those concepts to healthcare and really, have significant impact? So I think, we're seeing it, right? Not as in your face as the Waymos and the Teslas of the world, but it's definitely happening.
Yeah. Well, so you raise an interesting point, right? Data. I was reading a really interesting article a couple of weeks ago, and it was talking about just the sheer amount of data that providers are creating. So I think on average, it's 137 terabytes of data are being created every day by providers. Yep. And just to kind of give that some relative context, that's about 50 petabytes every year, which, somebody said, well, that's twice as much data as what's in the Library of Congress. A lot of data.
Yeah.
But the challenge as we think about healthcare and we think about, technology applications, majority of that data is going unused. Why? Well, not all of that data is structured, right? You think structured data, something very finite, your blood pressure, your weight, your height, right? It can easily be plugged in and analyzed where it sits. But a vast amount of the data that's flowing into a provider, into a health system, is really unstructured data, right? It's the data that's coming from things like the medical notes about a patient's condition or a patient visit that the doctor is notating. And that is incredibly insightful information that can really help in informing a patient's care plan. However, without technology, how do you make use of all this data, right? And that's where, again, you start to think about these exciting use cases around AI. Insert natural language processing, right? How do you take that unstructured data to essentially make it usable, make it easy to understand and translate kind of those written words or that unstructured kind of content into a way that says, gosh, I now can take this vast amount of data that's flowing through my healthcare system and think about, how do I now incorporate that into the care plan? Do I make a different decision about the medication that's being administered? Or do I think about the delivery of that medication? Oh, maybe this individual has trouble with, access to transportation. Okay, maybe I should automatically put them into, a mail delivery medication system. So that data piece is so significant when we think about, the power that AI can have in making use of that data.
Yeah. And quick logistical note, people are already putting questions in. We didn't even have to ask, right? So that's great to see. We'll get to some of those in a minute. And I get a wonderful perspective of working with, plug phenomenal customers like Inovalon and many other health techs, around the US, around the world. And it's, you talk about the unstructured data. We love what's happening with our friends north of the border up in Alberta. They've got an ambient scribe that's powered by Snowflake, and to your point, and it was born actually in the emergency room. And think about the interactions that happen in an emergency room. Is there even a medical scribe in there? Are they taking notes? And how much information, to your point, is when you say lost, it's not even getting from voice to text, right? So it's just voice that occurs, and then that's lost completely in the ether, right? Whereby if you've got a microphone in the room, everyone's bought in on it, right? And you're having that interaction, suddenly all that speech becomes unstructured text, But then that unstructured text using AI technologies becomes summarized text. You can extract medical information from that. And you have this tremendous, the one of the key concepts that I'm always careful about is data lineage, is that even if it's a three years later and that patient's had, they came in for a stroke and then they had a stroke 3 years later, a physician 3 years later must be able to get to that original audio from 3 years prior, right? The data lineage there, you have to have it. And so I think that's kind of a core component of what we're talking about is grab the unstructured data, store the unstructured data, build on top of that using the AI technologies, but don't forget about it. Don't leave it out, because at some point, you're going to need that.
Yeah, it's so true, because when a patient comes before a doctor, it's not just the immediate symptoms, like in what they're feeling in that moment. There's a series of activities throughout their life and their history, both, socially, medically, that is leading up to whatever has brought them in front of a doctor today. And so that history piece is incredibly important. I want to kind of touch on something that I think is really important. And I often get asked this question, right? How do you think about whether a situation is appropriate for the use of AI, right? That's something that always comes up. Oh, great. Like, we've just gone through a couple of different use cases, everything from non-healthcare with how do you make the roads safer, to, very healthcare specific. How do you perhaps get more sophisticated in your care plans or the type of care being delivered? And I think it's important to acknowledge that you have to be really clear on the problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
Are you taking what's the expression? Like, are you taking a hammer to something that needs a screwdriver or something like that? Yep. You've got to be really clear on what the problem is that you're trying to solve and what your goal is. When you're going into thinking about potential use cases for AI, if you don't know what it is that you're trying to solve for, how can you possibly think about the training for that model, or even measuring its success on the outcome? So I'd say critically, those two things are very important. And I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this too, Todd, as we've gone back and forth on, how, and obviously everyone here today is interested in how do you measure that success of the AI tech that you're implementing? I'd be curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm going to blend in one of the questions from Emily around, what do you wish every organization understood prior to beginning? We kind of touched on it there, and it's one of the things that I see is, people are like, we have to do AI, and it has to be for X, whatever that is. And what I wish everybody understood prior to that is that that's not the way, like, please don't go about it that way, right? Like I wish that they understood that, there are a multitude of ways to solve challenges and what have you. And a generative AI might be one way to do it, or it might just be a machine learning model, or it could be business intelligence, right? And so there's these different ways, and where the one thing that I wish people understood, and my advice is always bring your variety of people, whether it's, and here to that point, a business analyst, clinical analyst, right? Someone that is a data scientist, someone that is a data engineer, right? That understands the complexity of the data, understands how good the quality is of your data. It's always interesting to see who that falls to. Is that the data engineering team? Is that the analyst team? And who is really responsible for making sure that you have quality data? So when you look across all of that, as you're beginning, is that don't look at it as allowing one, and myself being a former CIO, it's like, and all you leaders out there, don't take the top down, man in the high castle approach of thou shalt do X. Mm-hmm. It's really a discovery, right? It's really digging in with your team and determining, do we have the right data quality, and throwing out a variety of ideas and really coming up with a list and saying, these are the potential, these are the problems we're trying to solve. what are the right technologies, and don't even if you hypothesize, right, that this one's analytics friendly, this one's data science friendly, then it's like everything now, like build an MVP. Is it going to solve the problem? Can we bring this to production? So there's a lot of things that, and the overarching point, it's experimentation, right? And modern cloud technologies allow you to experiment at scale, right? And so that leads to your question about, like, is it right? Is it worth it? And one of the fun things that I'm getting to see now is that the usage of AI generates data, which then you have to use in order to measure, right, how successful was your AI. And don't overcomplicate that, number one. Number two, don't not do it. There is so much out there where people are like, oh, I was told I had to do Gen AI, so I'm going to go do it. And they're not measuring it. And they're checking a box. And someone said, yes, I'm doing, one of these several things. But in the end, if you're not measuring that, then you have no idea what impact it has. You may get some anecdotal information, but in the end, you've got to generate and really understand what is the impact that it's having.
Yep. And I'm so glad you mentioned, and I want to just double click and re-emphasize, it's very important to have the experimentation mindset, both in the phase of ideation prior to the build, as well as post creation of the MVP. Going in with a mindset to expect that day one perfection is achieved, the model is perfect, we don't need to do anything, is not realistic. I do think that is a fallacy that people fall into, to think, well, great, it should just be perfect day one. We've done all the work leading up to it, set it and forget it. It should just go. That journey of experimentation continues even once you have AI working. And that is really important, again, when you're thinking about understanding that outcome and determining its success. Don't abandon day one because your expectations were here and you started here. That experimentation, those pivots, those small tweaks and pivots, as you see the results that are coming through based on the hypothesis you had at the beginning, it's going to help fine tune in a way that helps you get closer and closer to that goal. So it's important to just understand that, there is experimentation. You're not always going to have it perfect out the gate. Understanding that outcome piece as you're thinking about those early ideation steps and that hypothesis for the continual refinement to get it to the place where it will require work. It will require teams continually kind of having those discussions and making sure that that end goal is matching what you set out to achieve in the beginning.
Yeah. And kind of go on to that. Lily asked about what's the warning signs that your AI strategy isn't working. And I look at it two ways. Number one, I think you probably just heard, if it's not being measured, chances are it may not be successful. Now, that's not to say that it's not going to be successful, right? But if you don't have a method in place to set a baseline and then to understand what the change is to that baseline, you're not setting yourself up in a very good way. Number one. Number two, the mechanisms and what I've seen is the concept of throwing the concepts over the wall between a business unit, clinical unit, and an IT unit. Like, hey, tell us what you want. We're going to build it, right? And we're going to throw it back over the wall to you. And then we're done, right? Like, back to your point, the project is done. We took your requirements and we built it. And here it is. We threw it back over the wall to you, right? And good luck. Right. That's another warning sign. If some group you're working with just wants to take requirements and they don't want to iterate, they don't want to experiment, right? They don't want to be in the same room, then that's a warning sign, right? What I see, I cannot tell you how much, and this is not just in AI, but how much I've seen teams coming together, right, virtually or literally in person, and iterating on things together, the analysts, the data engineers, the architects, and all of that. I see so much more getting done, right? And more value being generated from that mechanism than the write out all your requirements. We're going to go work on this for 3 months. Here you go. Good luck. right? That doesn't work anymore, especially with these technologies.
1,000% agree. And I think that ties into a kind of a question from Lauren out there as well. That's, asking a lot about the benchmarks, right? And again, the kind of delivery of value. Problem definition and baselining at the beginning of your project is incredibly important. I don't think Todd or I could sit here and say to everyone, here's the exact set of 5 things to benchmark. Yep. And the reason for that is your benchmarks and your baselines that you take are very specific to the problem that you're trying to solve. Right. So you really need to make sure that problem identification, what you're trying to solve, is very, very clear. Because how you're going to measure that is very different. If I say, hey, I have a goal to, improve, healthcare outcomes, or I'm looking to measure that in terms of, maybe emergency room visits by a particular patient. Well, that might be fine for that type of a problem. Right. But what if my problem is on, managing staff, and I'm, my spend for my staffing capacity is through the roof, and my problem is trying to reduce the spend that I'm spending on, agencies, and I'm going to have a totally different baseline on how I'm measuring success. So I'm just going to reiterate to Lauren's question to say the benchmark is specific to the problem. Critically important to have that identification up front when you're thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve, and honestly, why you're even contemplating AI in the first place. Yeah.
No, I think one of the great things I've gotten to watch is that I have to let everybody know that there was a life before the phrase agentic AI. And I know it was a whopping like 3 months ago or whatever it was, right? So agentic AI is the new thing, right? The cool part that I've gotten to watch is, and I'm going to use a benchmark, sentiment score, right? So when you think about call centers, you think about patient interactions, customer interactions, sentiment score is a big deal, right? So I've been able to watch people using and generating sentiment score on unstructured data, bringing audio to text and generating sentiment score. And that's part of generative AI, and Snowflake has tools for that. That's great. And they did a great job. They created their baseline, right? They grabbed all the unstructured data and identified their problem areas, and they began to address them. So this was like a whopping year ago, right? Like insane. So they were doing that. And so then you see the iterative progress. So they were able to address issues, solve problems, and do that. So they had a nice lift in their sentiment score. Then along comes agentic AI. So now what if, right, I can install agents and not just have all human interaction? So I've now got all of this data. Do you think the agentic AI was possible had I not done that pre-work? Completely impossible, right? The only way to train the agentic AI was to have all of that data and to run things like sentiment score on it. So we've already seen, now we're seeing baseline, right, sentiment scoring using Gen AI. Now, phase 2, and these were early adopters, right? Phase 2 is, I'm going to take that information and I'm going to create an agent out of it. And now what do I get to do? I get to A/B test with the agent. So now, and guess what? The agents get a sentiment score, because the people that they're working with are going to tell you whether or not they like the agent or not, right? So it all goes back to the original thing that they did, was creating a baseline for their sentiment scores. So great bringing that. I mean, it's like one of the favorite things I get to see, right, is how these things build on top of each other from a Gen AI perspective. So it's a great example.
Yeah, and that ties into a question that Anthony has out there as well about, the degree of system integration around AI and how you minimize disruption to existing workflows. Yeah. And I feel like I'm going to sound like a machine here, but I think that the initial step of thinking about your workflow, like those two things go together. Thinking about your workflow and thinking about how AI is going to enable your workflow versus thinking about it as this thing that you do off on the side. Right. It is technology that's going to bolster the workflow you have in place. It's going to enable it. And so really thinking through from the very beginning, how does this technology support the goals of the existing workflow that you have? You've got to do that at the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to be left with, a thing over here and a thing over here going, well, now how do I put them together? Right. And you may have a misalignment of your goals and your outcomes and what you're trying to achieve. And so I would encourage everyone to really think about, again, AI is an enabler, right? It isn't something that is to be thought of as this distinct and separate animal, right? It is an enabler for your workflows today. Incorporating that notion into your concepts for design is step number one. And if you're not contemplating how it's going to enable your workflow, I'd encourage you to take a step back. And it should be supporting your goal. It should be driving to those things, which from a healthcare perspective, right? Workflow efficiency is absolutely number one. If you're doing something for the purpose of disruption versus the purpose of improving the efficiency, making the workflow easier, faster, stronger, then your goal is not aligned to why you're going after the AI use case in the first place.
Yeah. Now I'm on a little bit of a mission visually to all my wonderful architects out there. When you look at an architecture, right? We've got the data comes in from the multiple sources. It's all messy. It's all horrible, right? We have our bronze layer, our silver layer, our gold layer, and then out to the right is all the BI tools and all the Gen AI. It's a very linear visual.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm trying to encourage people to look at and think of it differently is that it's really a circular motion, right? And that to your like the way architects and we should all be thinking is that every input, right? The output is not something that just goes to the end and some analyst reads it and then says, oh, that's great. And you do population level analytics or what have you. Nothing wrong with that. That's great, right? That's not going away.
Right.
But now what we get to do with Gen AI is we get to create APIs. We get to create mechanisms that allows a user in their workflow to take in a corpus of unstructured data. It could be an image. It could be a video. It can be, right, any one of those things. Suddenly now you're calling an API and you're generating a output, right? And that's flowing right into the workflow. And so that's every chance I get, right? It's changing the line to a circle, right? Because it really is a circular motion. And that's something that it's amazing how many people, they just don't, they're wired. It's been wired in us for decades to think that way. And no fault of anyone's when you go back to the legacy data warehouses of old, right? We're now modern data platforms that are blurring the lines between what was transactional workloads and what was analytical workloads living in these two distinct worlds. That's not the case anymore. We're together. So the sooner that you grasp that and embrace it, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. And, Todd, I would also say there are a ton of tools out there that I know many, many folks within our organization are using that also, get to rapid prototyping. AI-based rapid prototyping tools. Best way to test if your workflow is working, get a prototype together and let users break it, right? Figure out all the ways in which it's not working. Amazing the technology that's out there that you can, to your point, upload images, upload commands, and boom, rapid prototype. It's working for you. You can see it. You can see what it's doing, how it's performing. Even tools like that are fundamentally changing how quick you're making iterations. And you can go to your own users and say, hey, how is this going to work for you, Biller? Like, is this going to be intuitive or not? Do we need to make tweaks? Do we need to make adjustments?
Right.
So think big when we think about, to your point, Todd, there's one, AI is ever evolving. You're right. 3 months ago, agentic AI, folks would have said, what is that? Now everything is about agentic AI. And there's so many layers to thinking about the different types of AI between natural language processing, agentic AI, generative AI, so many different components that you can think about how you weave all the different parts together, but also while thinking about your workflow.
Yeah, and to tag on the end of that question as well around minimizing disruption, let's pull back from the tech for a moment, right? Let's talk about people. Let's talk about change management. Who Moved My Cheese, the famous book, right? So part of this and what I've seen, and this happened in Alberta, was the sheer joy, literally joy, right, from clinicians for the first time in decades that an EHR, something in the EHR that made life right easier for the clinicians, right? How many things can we say have done that? Not a lot.
Yeah.
And so, the way to reduce your disruption is to create something and don't like blast it out to everybody. That scribe's gone through iterations. It was not perfect out of the gate. Let's be very clear, right? And so iterating early and getting that feedback and putting smiles on faces. So the way you reduce disruption is put smiles on faces, right? Make sure that it is doing what you want it to do, because you're always going to have, and they've had them, there is pushback from certain clinicians about using this technology. It's there, right? So that some of that's unavoidable. But if you get that groundswell of support and putting smiles on faces, then that disruption, it's going to be disruptive. It's new, right? But you get people behind it and supportive of it, then that's gonna be a whole lot easier to go from, 1 ED to 20 to 100 to now over 400. So that's the way to go about it.
I love it. And with that, hopefully Todd and I have put some smiles on your faces today, and also helped answer some of your questions around AI. And now you all have a couple of tools to determine if AI is worth its salary. But we appreciate everybody joining us today and hope that everyone has a nice day.
Thanks, everyone.